Good morning. Happy Mother's Day to the mothers. It's sometimes said that we've all been one another's mothers in previous lifetimes, which is, I think, another lovely way of recognizing the truth of our interconnection and interdependence. Okay, so my talk today is like all the other talks we're hearing in this first part of the year, based on talks that were given at the Bodhisattva retreat at the end of March, which were on the 7 Factors of Enlightenment. And my talk is on joy, or piti, which is the 4th enlightenment factor. And it's not going to be the same as the talk I gave, because I find that the more a topic is in my mind and that I'm thinking about it and considering it, that all these other teachings and materials come to my attention and they come up on my computer screen and I was like, oh, that's perfect, I can use that. So it's grown a lot and it's a lot been added to it, and I hope it's still somewhat coherent. So joy, or piti, which is the Sanskrit term, is one of the 3 arousing factors of enlightenment. The other 3 are investigation of phenomena, or wisdom, and energy, or effort. Joy is also associated with both the first and second jhanas, or meditative absorptions. And a Theravadan commentator, teacher, Piyadasi Thera, in Access to Insight, goes over some of the qualities of joy, or its effects and manifestations. He says that it suffuses both the body and the mind, and that it's necessary for proceeding on the path to enlightenment, as implied by the fact that it's a factor of enlightenment. It's a kind of excitement or enthusiasm for our practice and study. Without joy, we have a sort of sullen indifference to the Dharma and a kind of aversion to meditation. So joy is really a very important part of motivating us. Contentment is a characteristic of people who embody happiness or joy. And Piyadasi Thera gives some advice on how we practice or cultivate contentment. And he suggests that we give up grasping, or practice detachment and renunciation. That we treasure simplicity in our lifestyles, our tastes, our possessions. That we practice generosity, putting others before ourselves. Patience is another important practice for contentment. And patience is the antidote to aversion or hatred. Practicing virtue in general is an important contributor to contentment. And generating a calm mind through meditation. And it's important to see the difference between pleasure and happiness or joy. Pleasure is fleeting and momentary. It doesn't last. Ultimately, it leads to more suffering. But real joy comes not from grasping or clinging, but by giving up. It's important too to recognize, and I think we can see this if we examine our own lives, that the pursuit of happiness for its own sake is a fool's errand. When we say, I want to be happy, we're basically telling ourselves, oh, I'm not happy, I want to be happy, it's something that I want to get. And so I start using escapist means to achieve what I think is going to make me happy. And yet we can arouse joy. We don't grasp after joy, but we arouse joy by contemplating the benefits of our practice and approaching it with enthusiasm. So just as we can't grasp after nirvana, we can't grasp after joy or happiness. when we grasp after anything, then we're actually escaping from life as it is, in the present moment with all of its challenges. And similarly, if we think of joy or happiness as simply an absence of suffering or a state of freedom, then we're looking for a kind of heaven. Instead, I think it's important to think of joy as a way of experiencing life itself, with no separation between my awareness and my experience of it. Also, if I'm always focusing on how I am feeling, whether I'm happy or not, then I'm implicitly putting myself before others. This is why the acceptance of all the current conditions of life is so important. So then I want to just say a little bit about joy and meditation. And this came to me because I started reading a wonderful book called Focused and Fearless by Xianyi Sharon. And she talks about aspects of joy as related to meditation. She points out that the Four Noble Truths, which is the foundation, are the foundation of the Buddha's teachings. Because of their focus on suffering, they seem to give the impression or imply that Buddhism is a negative or fatalistic kind of philosophy. And yet, Xianyi Sharon reminds us that the Buddha realized the Four Noble Truths only after he had saturated his consciousness in the sublime happiness of jhana. She says happiness is the essential context for a liberating insight into the basic facts of discontent or suffering. So in other words, we can't truly realize the truth of suffering, its cause, its ending, and the path leading to its ending, unless we cultivate the joy inherent in concentrated meditation. And this is what makes joy or pity one of the arousing factors of enlightenment. I came across another very interesting teaching in Tricycle Magazine by Xianyi Sharon May. He also talked about the Buddha's awakening and that it didn't result from his ascetic practices, the mortification of his body. Instead, at this sort of critical point in his spiritual quest, he had three realizations which led to his adoption of the middle way and his ultimate enlightenment. First of all, he knew that he wanted to live and that these practices were leading to his death, his early death. And so he broke his fast and took food. Secondly, he knew that these practices had brought him no nearer to the answer to his quest. And third, he wanted to be happy as he remembered being as a child. And here we're given the story of the very small child, Shakyamuni Buddha, whose nursemaid placed him beside a field under a rose apple tree one day, and he watched a man plowing a field. And as he saw the plow's blade cut through the earth, he noticed many different insects and worms scurrying for their lives to get out of the way of the blade. And at this sight, a great sadness welled up in him. He saw that these little creatures were desperate, and he felt their pain as if it were his own. But right after that came an overwhelming joy, because he saw that the insects were not just linked to him, but were actually part of him. He and they formed a single phenomenon, a single body. And that realization brought effortless joy. This spiritual experience can be thought of as apprehension of the Dharmakaya, or the Dharma body, which means the singularity of all phenomena, our interconnection, our singularity with all beings. And yet for the Buddha, it came about through feeling, through tenderness, hurt, compassion, and love. So the Buddha taught that there are three kinds of joy. Physical joy, which we know through the senses. pleasing thoughts, sights, smells, sounds, and so forth, sensations. And then there's spiritual joy, which comes from concentrated meditation of the jhanas. And beyond that, he said, there's a more than spiritual joy. And this is the ultimate, the joy associated with ultimate liberation or enlightenment. There's also sympathetic joy. And this is one of the four immeasurables, which include loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. And sympathetic joy is the happiness felt at the success of others, when we feel their joy as our own. So just as the young Buddha felt compassion for the insects and worms trying to avoid the plow's blade, he also felt the joy of his oneness with them. So I think sympathetic joy is very similar to compassion, except that it's aroused by another being's happiness and joy, while compassion is aroused by their suffering. So I want to spend the rest of my talk looking at a teaching that came to me from somewhere, Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the Bodhisattva path. One chapter in particular, which is called on the perfection of joyous perseverance. Tsongkhapa was one of the great Tibetan teachers and commentators. He also refers and relates to Shantideva's teachings on the Bodhisattva path. So I'm just going to excerpt some passages that I think are particularly helpful to our understanding the role of joy in our practice, and particularly our practice of the Bodhisattva path. So Tsongkhapa first opens with the question, what is joyous perseverance? And the simple, briefest answer is, it's a delight in virtue. And I think it's important to recognize the relation between the two words, joyous and perseverance. Because to persevere is, we can think of it as the opposite of laziness, right? And yet just to avoid laziness by persevering is not enough. We're called to do so joyously. So if we persevere from a sense of oppression or ambition or some other negative motivation, we'll not succeed. If we start persevering with a sense of resentment, that's not what we need to do. So joyousness is necessary as part of persevering on the path. And also, joyousness is necessary because only in joy are we in that state of non-grasping, so that our motivation is pure. So Tsongkhapa divides joyous perseverance into 3 stages or kinds. The first he calls armor-like perseverance. And he says, when bodhisattvas joyously persevere, prior to actively engaging, they put on the armor of a preliminary enthusiastic thought, such as, for 1 trillion sets of 3 immeasurably great eons, each composed of days as long as 1,000 great eons, I shall not relinquish my practice of joyous perseverance. For the sake of relieving the suffering of a single living being, I would rejoice at remaining only as a hell being until I attain Buddhahood. As I exert myself in this manner for the sake of complete enlightenment, what need is there to mention my perseverance over a shorter period or in the face of lesser suffering? So in other words, he's saying that we have to be joyful and persevere no matter how long it takes. The second kind of joyous perseverance is that of gathering virtue, which means that we apply ourselves to the practice of the 6 perfections, the 6 paramitas, in order to properly accomplish them. And as a reminder, the 6 paramitas are generosity, morality, patience, energy, meditation, and wisdom. And thirdly, there's the joyous perseverance of acting for the welfare of other beings. So first, we recognize this could take forever, and you commit yourself for the long haul. Secondly, you practice virtue as part of your path, and then you dedicate it to the welfare of other beings. So then Tsongkhapa also describes a number of unfavorable conditions that interfere with the cultivation of joyous perseverance. One of the unfavorable factors is not entering the practice, even though you see you can do it. And second, not entering because you become discouraged, thinking, how can I do such a practice? And within the first factor, he says there are two possibilities. One, you have the laziness of procrastination, thinking there's plenty of time, I can do this later. Or you may not be procrastinating, but that you're overwhelmed by your attachment to other inferior activities. But there are methods to overcoming or eliminating these incompatible factors, and they are in three parts. First, stopping the laziness of procrastination. Second, stopping attachment to ignoble activities. And third, stopping discouragement or self-contempt. So just to elaborate on those three a bit, stopping the laziness of procrastination involves following these three meditations. You contemplate that the body you have at present is rapidly disintegrating, that after death you'll fall into miserable realms, and that it will be difficult to find an excellent life such as this one again. And then stopping attachment to ignoble activities involves seeing that the sublime teaching is the source of endless joy in this and future lives, and that you lose its great purpose when you're distracted in things like idle chatter and amusements, which just lead to more suffering later. So you invest your energy in the teachings and the practice rather than in things that you know are not going to bring you any further along in your future lives. Then stopping discouragement or self-contempt. He says it's not enough just to delight in sublime teaching, having given up procrastination, attachment to ignoble activities. Then we still have to train as a Mahayana practitioner. And stopping discouragement or self-contempt, again, has three parts. Everything has three parts. First, you stop discouragement about the goal. Secondly, you stop discouragement about the means to attain the goal. And third, you stop discouragement because wherever you are is a place to practice. So, stopping discouragement about the goal means that the goal is Buddhahood, a very great goal, likely to take eons of lifetimes. So how do we prevent ourselves who find it so difficult to contemplate even very simple qualities or to conquer even a few of our faults? How do we stop being discouraged? He says if such a sense of discouragement manifests, it's a very great fault because it constitutes giving up the spirit of enlightenment. We have to instead encourage ourselves with this thought. The Bhagavan, the Buddha, the authoritative person who speaks what is true and correct, never what is false or erroneous, has said that even flies, mosquitoes, insects will all attain enlightenment. That being so, why should I not attain it, so long as I do not give up persevering? Inasmuch as human birth gives me an excellent basis, and I have the mental capacity to analyze what to adopt and what to cast aside. Another thought that we can use to encourage ourselves is, in the past there were former Buddhas, now there are living Buddhas, and in the future future, there will also be those who reach Buddhahood. It's not the case that only one person who has already become the Buddha accomplishes the path. Rather, those, just like myself, gradually progressing upward, have become Buddhas and will become Buddhas. Then he turns to stopping discouragement about the means to attain the goal. And Tsongkhapa uses a nice little device. He frames it as someone expressing a qualm and then responding to that qualm. So the qualm is, to accomplish Buddhahood, you have to give away your feet, your hands, all of your body. But I'm not capable of such feats. And even those who are not on the Bodhisattva path spend lives after lives in cyclic existence, undergoing great sufferings. How can I promise to spend long eons deliberately undergoing suffering and hardship for the sake of beings? His reply is, with respect to giving away your body, you do not give it in the beginning when you're afraid, but through graduated training and generosity, you end your attachment to the body. Once you've increased the strength of your great compassion, you have no difficulty when you give it away, provided it's for a worthwhile purpose. Some say that since practitioners of the perfection vehicle, the Mahayana or the Bodhisattva path, must give away their bodies and lives, that they undergo torment and are on a path that's very difficult to follow. But this isn't true, because you do not give away your body so long as you perceive it to be a difficult deed. But rather you do so once it becomes as easy as giving away a vegetable. That's a great image. Have a turnip in my head. Then there is stopping discouragement, because wherever you are is a place to practice. And again, he expresses this in a qualm and a reply. So my qualm is, reaching Buddhahood requires taking limitless rebirths in cyclic existence, and so I'll be harmed by the suffering therein. I'm not capable of such a thing. His reply is, reflect as follows. Bodhisattvas have eliminated all sin. Therefore, sin's effect, the feeling of suffering, will not arise because they have stopped the cause. Through firm knowledge that cyclic existence lacks an intrinsic nature, like a magician's illusion, Bodhisattvas also have no mental suffering. Given that their physical and mental bliss increases, they have no reason to become disheartened, even though they're still in cyclic existence. So we can't discourage ourselves with the thought, to become a Buddha requires completing limitless collections of merit and sublime wisdom. This is so difficult that I could not possibly do it. First, he says, Tsongkhapa says, we motivate ourselves with the desire to attain the goal of limitless Buddha qualities for the welfare of limitless beings that we intend to help. Then we focus on remaining and existing in cyclic existence for a measureless period of time and take the Bodhisattva vows, thinking, I shall accomplish these limitless collections of merit. Then, as long as you keep your vows, whether your mind is distracted by other things or not, awake or asleep, you'll constantly accumulate merit, as vast as space. It's also important not to be discouraged by how long it may take to accomplish the Bodhisattva vow. Tsongkhapa said, if you should claim that you're seeking a quick path, you directly damage the engaged spirit of enlightenment and indirectly damage the aspirational spirit of enlightenment. I thought this was an interesting sentence, and I had to really think about it because he doesn't explain it. The aspirational, first the engaged spirit of enlightenment and the aspirational spirit of enlightenment. So I think it means that we sell short by wanting to do this quickly, or thinking it can be done quickly. thinking about the time it takes at all, perhaps, we sell short the commitment to the long haul that the enlightened attitude implies. And we also endanger our very yearning to reach Buddhahood and save beings in that way, wishing or thinking it can be done quickly or through some shortcut. So, having talked about the unfavorable circumstances that get in the way of our achieving Buddhahood, then Tsongkhapa turns to gathering the forces of favorable conditions for joyous perseverance. And this section has 4 parts, but I'll touch on them quite briefly. First is developing the power of aspiration, then developing the power of steadfastness, developing the power of joy, and then the power of relinquishment, which I think will be our favorite. First, developing the power of aspiration. Aspiration here refers to yearning. And the way to develop aspiration is to meditate on how pleasant and unpleasant effects arise from virtuous and unvirtuous karma, respectively. So we meditate on cause and effect. Then developing the power of steadfastness. This means that you finish everything you start. You don't turn back after you've begun to joyously persevere in a task. First, you don't try to do everything. You examine the situation carefully, and if you see that you can do it, you do it. If you see that you can't, you don't. He warns that you should not even start in the first place, things that you may just do for a while and then discard. And the reason for this is that if you develop this habit of giving up in the middle, what you've committed yourself to do, then through this conditioning, you'll do the same in future lives, and you'll again abandon your commitment to the training and so forth. So it's really important to think of yourself as training yourself for the long haul. And then developing the power of joy. This means that when you first engage in an activity, you do it joyfully. And once you've engaged this, you continue it with a sense of being insatiable and that you don't want to stop. And here he quotes Shantideva, who says, like those who want the pleasure that results from play, bodhisattvas are passionate about any activity they have to do. Insatiable, they take joy in their work. So we strive with an attitude like that of children who engage in play without ever getting tired of it. So we have to be just as insatiable about what causes pleasurable results as we are about the results themselves. And again, he quotes Shantideva, even though they work for the sake of happiness, it is uncertain whether happiness will come. But as for those whose work itself is happiness, how can they be happy unless they work? And I'm going to conclude with what he calls the power of relinquishment, because I think we can take comfort in this one if we're feeling mentally exhausted at the thought of the Bodhisattva path. If you become physically or mentally fatigued from your perseverance, you must rest for a while. Otherwise, you'll become exhausted and very disheartened, and thereby later preventing your joyous perseverance. However, immediately after you've rested, persevere again, and when you've completely finished your first activity, you don't let this satisfy you, you take up the next task with joyous perseverance, advancing always along the way. So we're not to overexert ourselves. We have to avoid being overly intense and being overly relaxed, and making our effort continuous like a river. So this brings to mind, it brings us back to the idea of the middle way, of the idea of tuning the strings, neither too tightly nor too loose when we meditate. And so I hope that there was some merit generated by this talk, and that all of us and all beings may experience joy in their lives and in their practice. persevere in our practice until we've liberated all beings, however long it takes.